Firstly, welcome everybody to today's panel's discussion, Efficiency in Action, the Power of Tech Collaboration for Optimal Customer Outcomes. A bit of a mouthful, but I'm acting as the host today, so doing less speaking, which I'm sure people will be pleased to hear. The people we want to hear from are the group of domain experts that we've gathered together today, so thank you guys for joining us. I'm going to move over to you as soon as possible to introduce yourselves, but just firstly, setting the scene, if I may, the current market and economic challenges that we're all experiencing require businesses like individuals to sort of balance their needs. And in the case of businesses, the balance their books as far as customers and costs are concerned. And of course, pay attention to the regulator at the same time, but keep an eye on the bottom line, and driving operational efficiency are paramount in the current climate. It feels like there's some potentially conflicting topics in amongst that group of topics, but we'll see how we go today. Rising costs affect everyone, including financial businesses and their operations, whether that's people or inflation costs in general, including price increases for the Royal Mail, etc. Naturally, that leaves organisations looking for ways to minimise their costs without sacrificing services that they offer. And creating more effective operating models to reduce the cost to serve and deliver better value to customers. One consistent theme is our regulator and regulatory change. And those regulators require businesses to adhere to obligations regarding client comms and data, which includes the ICO and the FCA. Understandably, they want us and businesses to respect their customers' data, the sensitive information that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And failure to do so can mean some pretty hefty fines for non-compliance, which can be many millions. Data obligations and the latest FCA consumer duty regulations mandate provision of easy to understand communications to avoid financial harm, and also ensure that consumers have a better outcome as their underwriting principle. All the time, making sure that they're providing for safe delivery of information to the right people and preventing unauthorized access. So I'm hoping the reason why we've gathered together this esteemed panel of experts is starting to make a bit of sense. But what I'd like to do is very, very briefly just pull up on screen a slide that I hope will present well in terms of the very problems and the issues that we're trying to deal with today. So as far as the reasons for change and innovation, there are all sorts of drivers that might compel us to be considering change that are listed on the left. I'm not planning to run through them each individually, but what I would like to say, and what I think will help articulate better than I can the reason for this interesting set of group of people to speak about the subject, is that to enable the things on the left to happen, and to fulfill those drivers, there is a whole set of skills that are required on the right-hand side, those enablers, right through from comms and data integrity, security, obviously a subject close to our hearts, process efficiencies, and the entire subject of software estates. Hence the reason we've got the group with us we have today. And with that, what I'd like to do is just to perhaps firstly ask Chloe, Simon, Alan, Matt, and Adam if they could briefly introduce themselves and their businesses, please. So Chloe, starting with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Chloe Taylor. I'm the CEO at Quiet Room. We're an insight-led communications consultancy. So we're here to make pensions, but also investment and insurance accessible to the people that need them. Very complex industries with very important outcomes, but typically an audience who aren't as expert as the people that are talking to them. We work with every bit of the financial kind of ecosystem, so pension schemes and providers, asset managers, insurers and advisors, all in between as well.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Chloe. I'm going to go around clockwise on my screen, probably different for others, but perhaps Simon, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and the business, that'd be great.
Thank you, Paul. So my name is Simon Luty. I'm the founder and the Chief Innovation Officer of Livingstone. We're actually part of the Trustmark Group. Livingstone was acquired back in January of 2023. Obviously, I have seen a huge amount of change in the software asset management market. Livingstone's primary focus is delivering software asset management managed services. And a significant amount of the drivers that we speak to our customers about today is cost efficiency and driving out cost from these expanding budgets for software and cloud. And my core responsibilities are our propositions and our technology go-to-market. So hopefully satisfying some of the topics in your document. As I said, Livingston's really responsible for helping customers understand and control these significant investments they have in software and cloud services.
Perfect. Thanks, Simon. Alan, over to you briefly for me.
Thanks, Paul. So, I'm Alan Clay, Head of Strategy for Customer Data Solutions at LexisNexis. What does that mean in practice? Well, we've built reference databases for both the physical attributes of people, so names, addresses, dates of birth, email and contact data, but as well as understanding people in their physical environment, we've also built databases looking at devices and how they're used. And so this rather complements the data that clients are capturing and checking it's accurate both at point of capture and throughout time to make sure that any communications reach the right person at the right time through the right channel. But we'll hear more of that later.
Thank you. And Matt, if I may, from Alpha, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm part of Alpha's Life Pensions and Retail Investments consulting team. Alpha is a leading financial services management consulting group. I lead our cost optimization capability where we help clients align costs to strategic imperatives. So naturally, anything that can have an impact on cost and customer experience, we are very interested in, and I would dare say our clients are even more interested in.
Great stuff. And last but not least, Adam, thanks.
Hi, Adam Byford. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer here at Beyond Encryption. Beyond Encryption is focused on customer engagement and securing comms that would traditionally have gone via paper to go via a secure email service.
So hopefully for those that are listening, it makes a little more sense, I hope, as to why we've gathered this group of experts together. So if I may, probably starting off with you, Chloe, particularly because of this, the subject of consumer duty. It's a phrase that gets bandied around a lot, and with the emergence of consumer duty in financial services, there's been an impact on the frequency and nature of comms with customers. I wonder if you could give us a bit more information about the sort of things you're seeing day to day in how you're helping companies deal with that.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a really successful piece of legislation, regulation, at least at the beginning. We're still early days, I think, really, but it's very principles based as a piece of regulation, which means there's lots of kind of guidelines, lots of very practical things that come out of it. Like if you talk about charges, you need to talk about them there and not point someone to somewhere else. So some of it's really prescriptive. And in many ways, those are the easiest bits to just execute and kind of get done. But at the same time, I think it has changed some of the way that people are approaching communication. I'd say there's two big things that are the most relevant to the discussion today in terms of the impact it's had on the way that we're seeing businesses starting to communicate differently with their customers. One is the frequency. So there's lots of parts of the consumer duty that talk about the timeliness of communication. There's very explicit sort of guidance in there saying that particularly in the financial advice sort of space, once every 2 years is not frequent enough to be speaking to your customers, to be giving them advice. So some of it is really driving frequency, some in a very prescriptive way, and some just from the place of saying, actually, sending the same letter to everyone once a year isn't very helpful. That person's life isn't the same as your other consumer's life, So trying to do that sort of frequency piece so that it's driven by things that are happening to people, things that we know about our consumers, so that it comes at the right time, so that it lands in the right context, and essentially so that someone can do something with the information you're sending them, because presumably you're sending them something for them to do something with, or perhaps just for them to know something. So that's one big part of it. The second big part of it, and I'm sure we'll come on to this later, is the personalization. So lots of consumer duty centers around the idea that we can't just talk in generalizations. If we talk in generalizations and we give huge amounts of information to our consumers, we're putting the burden on them to make good choices, to understand which pieces are relevant to them. And actually, a lot of the sort of spirit of the regulation is about the duty that is on the providers, the duty that is on the industry to do some of that work for people. We're the experts. And it's therefore our role to give people the information they need at the right time that is pertinent to them and their circumstances. So I would say, yeah, frequency and personalization are the two really big changes, or at least things that the best practice in the industry, that was already the case. But the sort of consumer duty regulations really driving, I think, more people to look quite carefully about how frequently and they're communicating and how personalised those communications are to their consumers.
Adam, that would play definitely to the topics that we've seen with providers in that space.
Yeah.
Do you want to lead a bit more to that?
Yeah, I guess what we're seeing is a lot of attention on the comms that are going out. One, to make sure that people understand what is being relayed, as Chloe just said about we as an industry we're supposed to be experts, so yeah, an expert should be able to explain to someone in simple terms what they do. So that's a challenge, because not all comms that come out from our industry are easy to understand. Having to be able to evidence the fact that a customer has received a document, a communication, is a new piece. So again, in the past, it's been easy enough to send something through the post and assume that it's been received and been read and been understood. But putting a bit of onus on the sender to make sure that comm is received. It's very difficult to do through traditional means, but something that's a little bit easier to do via an email service such as ours. Small plug, but really, and I guess the other talking of frequency, I think cost has been a massive driver to the frequency or lack of frequency of communications. So if we're able to change that, the economics of communicating with a customer, it should lead to more frequent communications, which should lead to a greater engagement with those customers, which is ultimately what the regulator wants to happen. So I think there's a lot of change that can happen, and there's a lot of good that can happen as a result of consumer duty.
And I guess that only comes if you're going to look at alternative delivery mechanisms. Then your records have got to be sound. You've got to your data, the integrity of your data has got to be good. And that brings beautifully in the LexisNexis piece from your side, Alan, because that's I guess where you're trying to help these organisations provide a stepping stone into that world where they perhaps have been less active than they probably should have been historically.
Yeah, and it presents some new challenges as well. So as Zoe mentioned, if you're communicating about a particular product at about a particular time, there's a new challenge that if you've got a mortgage and a current account, a credit card and savings with the same organisation, and it's run in a siloed way, you don't want to be bombarded with the same or similar types of information from the same organisation. So that talks to the creation of a single customer view and keeping that operational. But although it's reducing, when we have conversations today with people and say with organisations and say, have you got a single customer view? Often it's, yes, we've got two or even three of them, because there's one in operating in risk, one in marketing, and the other one in operations, which clearly doesn't help the whole consumer duty process. And equally, there's the dimensions of, are you a live customer, a dormant customer, a lapsed customer, or even a lost customer? And all of these bits need to be considered at that organisational level, because it's not just you pay off your mortgage, which means you are no longer a mortgage customer of a big bank, but you've got to consider it in the whole. And so it's managing all of these components together through the right channel at the right time. And without wishing to be controversial, because it's your gig, perhaps email all the time isn't the right piece. As Chloe rightly mentioned, it's about sending the right communication through the right channel at the right time to the right person to convey the message. So the important principle there is a mix of things. It's not just digital is cheaper, therefore go into email all the time and so on. So there's a number of pieces.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I mean, and the preferencing piece. I mean, when we first suggested that we should gather this group together, I mean, I guess we were banging the cost drum, because economically, it feels like that seems to be a real driver and focus. But then I think it was actually Chloe that first year, I agree, but because of the evolving regulations, you can't do things at the sufferance of the consumer, because you're then moving away from the regulatory drivers. So but coming initially back to the cost management piece, because it obviously sits high on the agenda for the C-suites of these large organizations, and perhaps firstly turning to Matt in a more raw way, we'll come over to Simon in a second, but efficiency often correlates with cost savings. So how do you balance the investment in tech with that in mind, and the tangible benefits it brings to customer experiences? How do you deal with the dynamics of all of that?
I think Enzo Ferrari once said that when a thing works better, it's usually more beautiful to the eye. And while we're certainly not building supercars here, I do think the principles are the same. And this is what we see in kind of working with a lot of our clients. When a more efficient, streamlined process is built, that benefits both the customer and the consumer, as well as the bottom line. And it's just a matter of kind of what the institution wants to prioritize more, what they want to highlight, who the stakeholders are, and then we can lean into either one of those. I don't know, Simon, or if you've had a similar experience as well.
Can I before you say that, can I just set the scene something for Simon? Because for me, where this whole conversation started, and the reason my head was in cost was, and Chloe was championing quite rightly, cost cuts shouldn't come at the sufferance of consumer outcomes, because that's contrary to what the whole industry is required to conform to. And let's be honest, in the consumer world, that's the case. What was interesting when I first met you, Simon, was that your Livingston's capabilities were trying to set out and help businesses understand their own operations, right down to the fact that most of us, I'm pretty sure, will subscribe for a whole gang of software that comes in a bundled way. It all looks beautiful and nicely wrapped up, except for the fact we're quite often buying things we simply don't need, or we don't need there, but we do need in another part of the business. And that's I'm really oversimplifying it. I appreciate that, but from a Livingston perspective, that your asset management, as you call it, is the piece that can drive real, tangible, very quick cost reductions without a sufferance of the operations.
Yes, and the problems, we don't see customers not investing in their customer experience. We almost see our customers and our clients treat that as a priority. The problem is those aren't necessarily new requirements, but they do buy a lot of new technology. So the intention usually is to bring in new tech, bring in new solutions to drive a new outcome, on the justification that we're going to remove some of our old stuff. And it's the not removing the old stuff which is creating the proliferation and the duplicative functionality in our organizations. And what's happened over the last 20 years is that has just compounded and compounded. So on a very regular basis, we will be finding between 5 and 10 tools that have been bought in isolation that are all designed to do something quite similar. And then what we also find, especially with the larger organizations, is we're going to buy this, but we're going to turn this off. And then when they come to turn that off, there is one feature that's incredibly critical, and they cannot remove the cost. So we're seeing people try and react to their customer demand. We're seeing them react to regulation. But what we're not seeing them do is kind of clean up afterwards. And what we do when we first engage with a customer is try and shine a light, firstly, on what do you own? And secondly, on what do you use, which are very, very complex things to identify if you have 3,000 licensable applications that live in your environment. So what's basically happening is CFO is getting very upset that his software costs and his software budget's going up 10, 20% a year. And it's because no one's actually got the data or the time or the expertise to go and fix the underlying problem. And these things are not cheap. These software providers are compounding in terms of price increases and harmonization and CPI clause increases. So if you're not really going to take on the massive challenge, which is if we want to try and reduce cost here, we're actually going to have to remove some technology from our environment, then unfortunately that challenge becomes incredibly difficult. But what we are seeing is the acute end of this challenge pool, which is you went to cloud, that's going through the roof. You've moved to SaaS, that's now going through the roof. You were supposed to get rid of the old legacy, but that's now increasing too. So these concepts about new ways to consume are the right concepts, but unfortunately the customers aren't actually reacting to them in the right way. So it's creating this significant amount of technical debt and waste, which comes into tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, and that was the interesting bit, and the synergy in a way that this all comes down to data and analysis. Is that, in the same way as you're trying to help people understand their own businesses, their own software assets, and some of the stats your colleague Simon mentioned to me before about, optimizing that were ridiculous. And it's the same in financial services, understanding what our clients need when, and like you say, and dealing with that in the right way, which isn't always going to be one method or another. But some of the metrics you mentioned were just extraordinary. I mean, people with 30-40% savings on their asset bases, which are, like you say, many millions of pounds, and being blunt, freeing some revenue up in those spaces by just doing what you should be doing anyway, managing your estate, is where you can then, wheedle out revenue for innovation and other process efficiencies. But massive numbers, wasn't it?
Yes, and if you think about what I just talked about, trying to wrap your hands around an entire portfolio, what you use it for, how you do it, it's a really significant challenge. The other problem with software and cloud services is every end user customer is at a complete disadvantage. So they are kind of in this constant cycle of hundreds of renewals per annum, and they only get one opportunity to negotiate with their provider once every 3 to 5 years. And that provider has changed all of the terms and the pricing under the hood, which makes it incredibly difficult to budget for. So if you're negotiating a $50 million contract per annum, and you've only ever done it 3 times in the last 10 years, how are you going to have a meaningful negotiation with that provider if you don't have the data or know what that provider is going to allow you to have? So when we engage a customer, it's almost on an axis pool. What can we do commercially and help you negotiate better deals by leveling the playing field? Some of the biggest opportunities are going to be going deep into that portfolio, but tearing the product out and replacing it, significant investment and complexity. So the prize might be high, but the investment and cost is going to be high too. So it's really about trying to work out what is achievable. I mean, the data is essential, the data on what you've got today and what you need in the future. And if we can lay our hands on that data very quickly, we can weaponize it on your behalf as an end user. And like I said, we will even that playing field, because it's not in a provider's best interests to tell you all the ways that you should be saving money with them. And then obviously, if you compound that over 100 different suppliers, everybody's trying to take advantage of our customers. It's data, time, and expertise. If you're a bank, you can't be a software expert and a cloud expert. You're in banking. Well, you need some help to try and shine a light on this data to give you the right recommendations to drive out those costs. And there are very, very high impact, low complexity initiatives, which is where we like to start. And then what we're trying to do, which I think this group is trying to do, which is once you've had one good experience, where do we go next? Once we've done a realization of value, we can invest some of that money into the next initiative and grow that concept as we go forward. Trying to take on everything as a big bang is just too comprehensive. So it's about target identification, and then obviously something's very important here. Identifying an opportunity isn't the value. You have to realize it. So that's another real key focus for us. It's great if we can find $10 million worth of opportunity, but if you can't do anything about it, unfortunately, you're not going to get value from it.
And in the same context, so it's sort of moving on to this sort of customer-centric approach, which is obviously what consumer duty compels that, and it's what everyone should be doing. Everyone's trying to evolve to meet consumer expectations, because certainly for me, it feels like the financial services market continues to lag other sectors in that context, and therefore it's the very reason why the skill sets around the table today are important, where people can call upon it, and those partnerships, technology or otherwise, really become important to make those processes and things efficient. But I'm going to swap things around slightly here. Applying technology, yes, it's important. Obviously, it's a space we're in. But what we've seen, Chloe, if I may, first of all, was that how you engage your customers. You can use the best technology in the world, but unless you're actually going to communicate at a level that a customer understands, and in a lot of cases you're trying to articulate quite complex subjects, it's just not going to work. How do you? I guess what you're providing is access to those sorts of skill sets and allowing them to remain flexible to be efficient. What's your take around that?
Yeah, so I mean, very similar actually to what Simon was just talking about. The first thing to do is what what have you done, and is it working, or is it not working? And if it's not working, how much awareness and understanding do you have about why it's not working? Because our human instinct is to add stuff when something isn't working well, which is a really interesting parallel to that kind of estate that Simon was just talking about. Oh, I need one more thing. I won't see if anything I've already got will do it. I won't take something away and see if that removes the problem that's been created. I'll add another thing. And I think sometimes we have that problem with communications, whether it's add another channel, that'll solve my problem. Oh, if I take this thing I've already done, but I make it a video, maybe that will make it better and people will want to watch it more. Or, oh, I'm not sure we've covered everything. Let me add a few more paragraphs. Let me add another page. Let me add an infographic. None of these are bad options, but they often come from a place of a lack of clarity about what you're trying to achieve and what's already working or not working. So much of it is just starting from insight. There's lots of stuff in the regulation that talks more about just about asking your customers, talk to them, find out what they do and don't know, what they do and don't want. There's always going to be a balance in financial services communications in particular between what we have to say, what is a disclosure we have to make, what is good for people to know, even if they're not sure or they don't know yet that that's important information. But we do often over index on that and under index on what our consumers really want to hear, what experience they really want to have. And frequently we find that businesses and organizations don't really know what their consumers do and don't understand, what they do and don't want from their provider. So insight is a really big thing up front, so that you then invest in the right changes so that you know whether actually it's not that your portal doesn't work, it's that no one knows it's there and you just need to promote it better. Or whether it's not that, I don't know, your website is rubbish, it's just really hard to navigate. Or actually maybe it is rubbish, but maybe no one needs a website anyway. And so all of these questions are all about to kind of bring it together with that efficiency question. Once you really know what's going to move the dial, then all of your money is really well spent and you'll get value from it, rather than I think sometimes there's a bit of a trap, which is to spend a lot of money on something that's very shiny and exciting, but doesn't actually help people. You know, you look at something like gov.uk. Gov.uk is the most basic from a sort of design perspective. It's black and white, but it is so clear. It is based on so much data. When you look something up on gov.uk, when you look up bank holidays and it says the next bank holiday is here, that's because they knew that 97% or whatever it was of people that went looking for a bank holiday page on the internet just wanted to know when the next one was. But how many of our websites try and give you chapter and verse on something when actually we know that probably the vast majority of people are going there for one specific piece of information? I could go on for ages about more things about personalization, but I think that's a really interesting piece around that insight-led understanding of what our consumers want that brings together that piece of efficiency so that you know that you're going to get value for the money that you're spending on communicating with your members and your customers.
And I guess being willing to accept that sometimes you're not going to get it right and you've got to move, you know, and you've got to change your approach. I think to a certain extent, financial services has been a bit lacking in that. You know, people follow.
And partly because that's really hard to do when you're doing it offline.
Yeah.
You can't recall letters and send out new ones in the way that you can alter a web page or edit a video online or tweak some copy on a digital journey. So one of the big benefits of moving to more digital channels is actually the flexibility for personalization, but also for evolving understanding and a kind of iterative approach to what your consumers really want from you.
And Adam, I mean, I'm guessing it's probably obvious, but you know, the providers do seem to be willing, and we encourage them to seek expertise from outside of the organisations where they're so busy with business as usual. I don't know what your discussions have been like around that topic.
So I think the financial industry is well behind other industries in terms of what it provides its customers with, how it understands it, and as Chloe said, its insight into what customers want is either lacking or being ignored quite often. One of my favourite phrases is a fair value exchange, and as an industry, again and again and again, we expect a customer to provide us with so much stuff, and then we give them little back, and that then doesn't feel like any sort of partnership, and it feels very much like you're being done to as a customer, as opposed to engaged. And so that's an important facet. I guess the other thing, the whole issue is multidisciplined, and therefore, hence why we're having this conversation today, and whilst there's so many different partners here representing different aspects to it. Tech is a solution, but it's not going to be everything. And I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we think it is everything. I think going back to brass tacks with things is really quite important. I mean, as an example, I was arranging a ISA transfer just the other week with what is supposed to be the gold standard company for self-service in this space. Now, I couldn't undertake that transfer online due to some restraints on their system. And since then, I've received 5 letters from them, each with a little bit of information, not necessarily giving me any pathway forward. And just think about, I would expect, having worked in the industry for 30 years, I pretty much know a lot of what would be going on and the rules around ISAs and how to do things. But 5 letters later, I don't feel like I know anymore. And so, if that is what people aspire to try and achieve, what that company is achieving, then we're setting our standards far, far too low. So I would say, though, expect the challenges that you're going to come across to be very varied, and don't try and answer them all yourself. Seek help. There are people who are experts in very specific areas, and if you get help from one of them rather than trying to answer everything yourself, then that's going to be of benefit to you and to your customers. And I think that's really important.
And the perfect segue. I mean, it's that line, bad data in, bad data out. And I guess that's, as in terms of integrity of data, Alan, that's where you guys come into on the scene to sort of help people not just do that as a spot process, but keep their data live for for the length of a customer relationship on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and there's a basic principle here, as both Simon and Chloe have alluded to. The first point in the journey is to understand what you've got today.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge with data is what we call unknown unknowns, things that happen that shouldn't happen but are in data. So this might be 5-year-olds owning pensions. Clearly, a 5-year-old can't own a pension because you've got to have been through a bit of a working process, unless there's child labour somewhere in the country that's hidden. But the incorrect date of birth has got all sorts of implications. So if you assess the data first for its usefulness, its accuracy, it's not just, is there something in that field, which is where current regulation tries to focus, but it's taking that holistic view to say, is there something in there? That's a good start. Is it accurate and timely? So it's somebody's latest address rather than their previous address or previous address. And then it's making sure that you can contact them so that you can actually send a message through the right channel to educate the customer about what you want them to do next. Now, I was thinking, as everyone's been talking, it's like if we all went out and bought a Formula One car is accepted as probably the fastest vehicle on the planet. But if you had any of us driving it, unless you've got hidden skills, you probably wouldn't go that fast. So it's about the combination of the best technology with the right guidance and the right driver in this case to really make it the most powerful experience that you can possibly deliver.
And on that, I mean, Adam, your example was a good one for Chloe, actually, to ask what the ramifications are when you've got bad data, bad experience for a customer. That's just a slippery slope, isn't it? I mean, Adam Bobby's is probably poorly dispositioned towards that brand just because of that experience. Where you must see that happen a lot.
Yeah, and I think our industry is so risk averse and so full of kind of compliance and legal as drivers of decisions, lots of which is for good reason, but often it means that because schemes and businesses are so afraid of the wrong data or making a mistake, that actually they shy away from a lot of opportunities that are there for personalization. We know time and time again, all the research that asks people what they want, what would make them interested, what would make them read something, is tell me about my money. I don't care about the kind of whys and wherefores of how this product necessarily works or what you're doing as a business. I want to know about my money, what's happening to it, where it is, what I can do with it. And the only way that the industry can satisfy that kind of need and desire from our consumers is through good quality data, so that you can talk to people about what's theirs and what they're interested in. And obviously, one extreme risk is that you get the wrong data in the wrong place, and that's a whole other conversation about sort of security and GDPR. But what happens is that fear drives a lack of innovation and a lack of people being willing to, at least for a portion of their consumers, give them what they really want and need, which is tailored information about them and their circumstances.
And it also sounds like, as you say, the wrong data. I mean, that can be really dangerous. But moving into the sort of internal processes and the problems and constraints that providers have about it. So that one for you, Matt, really dovetailing the right tech solution and then the right processes internally to deploy that tech solution in order to make the sort of make this experience not what Adam had, a seamless one, a non-seamless one into a seamless one. What it feels like there's a whole heap of work that these providers need help on to sort of understand those touch points and where those services do work together. That's the space that you're involved in on a regular basis, I guess.
Absolutely. And Chloe mentioned kind of the importance of understanding the customer up front. I think that's one of the key tenets to ensuring that the process aligns to what the customer needs and designing a good process. And Simon talked about some of the tech debt and some of the challenges there. It's all about implementing the technology that fits with that customer experience to make sure that it's valuable and you don't end up with the 5-letter ISA transfer that Adam is going through right now. So really starting with understanding the customer up front, even from a cost optimization standpoint, making that investment up front. It's not all about cutting costs. It's about making sure that the money is spent in the right way and aligns to strategic imperatives. So making that relatively small investment up front to understand the customer and bring that thread through any sort of technology implementation is going to help you both from a top line and bottom line standpoint. You're going to have better customer experience, increase retention. That's going to grow top line and bottom line. From an operational standpoint, it's going to be more streamlined. You're going to get less customer calls, asking questions. You're going to be sending out fewer letters, and it all kind of works in concert. So absolutely, Paul, it's important to kind of consider the operations, the customer experience, as well as the technology that can enable that from the very beginning.
How willing are providers though to invest in understanding what is probably they realize is a suboptimal process? It feels like telling someone, look, in order to understand and what you can do to correct something, you need to understand what you're doing wrong in the first place, which I think is a point Chloe was making as well. But it feels to me like it's almost a poison chalice when someone says to you, well, are they willing to even engage you to do that? I mean,
it's a question that hits home for me, Paul. Hits close to home. A lot of the engagements that we do require a good, solid understanding of kind of current state and some of the challenges that are associated with the current state and what the customer needs. But very frequently, providers are eager to get to the answer, tell us kind of what we should be doing. So we, as kind of a team, have to balance doing kind of some of that current state understanding work while delivering the answer, what we think the initial hypothesis is, which is a great way to kind of go into a lot of these projects with kind of an initial hypothesis, and then validating that throughout the engagement to make sure that the customer needs are being met and the process aligns to that initial hypothesis, which then can be tweaked up and down. So any sort of kind of framework that the folks on this call can bring in understanding this is what the solution could look like, and then tweaking it from there is a great way to approach this kind of work.
And the other piece that we came out of a piece of research we only released very recently was that when we started looking and talking to product providers about how they try and monitor what success looks like, coming back to the point you've made, Simon and Chloe, when you're going into these processes, what does good look like in terms of the impact of new technology and new processes? There seemed to be a lack of understanding of the metrics that they even had to measure, which is a bit worrying. It's all well and good saying that we know we need to do this better, but what is that? What does better look like? Is that something you find? Is that what you try to drive into the processes from a consultative perspective, Matt, from your side?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what do they say? What is measured is managed. So it's absolutely important to kind of have those metrics. I think some of the digital customer communications and tools that are out there, it was mentioned a little bit earlier, are far and away more effective at getting those metrics and being able to measure and manage the impact of those customer communications than, say, a written letter sent through the Royal Mail. And being able to understand that the letter was opened, it was opened by the right person, and then track that there was an action made on the back end of that letter, incredibly valuable for managing a business and demonstrating impact of communications. And then that's big feedback, right? Because changes are then made to how you communicate. So metrics, both from a kind of effectiveness standpoint as well as a cost savings standpoint, incredibly important.
And sort of, I guess, on that similar but more technically slanted subject, I mean, with the amount of consolidation that's gone on in our market, I guess it's not a big surprise to know that these huge enterprises have a very delicate, if I say it politely, legacy of infrastructure, amongst some of those largest providers, and it always feels like they're permanently grappling with that phrase technical debt, which is largely associated with the mash together of those systems, as you said, Chloe, the layering on of new systems, and rather than trying to review them as a whole. How do you, from your point of view, Simon, how do you, in a way, the review of that estate in itself is innovation, because people generally haven't looked at it, as you said before, for in some cases decades, I have a suspicion. How the real return on your process, I guess, is quite a compelling argument to that backdrop.
And it is about data. I mean, we've talked about it a bunch, but if you think about managing software and investments effectively, we kind of need these three key data sets. What do you own? Which sounds like a really simple thing, but it's really difficult to lay your hands on. What are you using? Well, that usage is completely different across all of those different technologies. And then what do you need in the future? Well, you have to work all of those different initiatives out. If that's not a clean data set, it's incredibly difficult to make an informed decision. I mean, one of the first steps we have to do is connect into an environment and find out what's running, as in all of the hardware and software. And that's when the lights go on and you identify out of support hardware, out of support software, significant amounts of vulnerabilities. I mean, we're talking about trying to optimize cost. And one of the inhibitors sometimes is people having to pay for extended support agreements because they can't get off old technology. So some of these systems are archaic and incredibly complex to change, which keeps you on that old stack. And the older that stack becomes, the more it costs you to support. And that's why you have to tack on all the new bits on top of it. So you're just in this perpetual cycle of inefficiency, and people are making really great innovative decisions, but not looking at the base. And we know with the advent of new technology and AI, it's just going to get worse. SaaS was designed to make life easier, but now it just means all of your software is in 1,000 different places. And cloud was designed to make life easier and more cost efficient. What those two providers now mean is you can't be non-compliant, because if you didn't pay for it, you can't use it. But the other side of that coin is you can certainly buy too much, and no one comes back and said you didn't use 95% of my stuff. So it's everything's just become significantly more complex in laying your hands on the right sets of data to understand technical debt. And I think companies will constantly invest in competitive advantage and trying to drive better of their client outcomes. But they're going to end up, I mean, what we're seeing in the market is double-digit budget growth, but not double-digit benefit. So you are seeing software budgets go 20% year over year. Revenues are not. So there is a break somewhere here. What that's telling us is people are not getting the value from that technology, and they might get that from an isolated situation. But when we're talking to a customer who spends $500, $600, $700 million a year on applications, they're not getting double-digit gains and double-digit benefit. And it's really just down to the complexity of the task.
And that whole shift and change, yeah, it's a really, really interesting thought that what you used to have in a rack somewhere and you sort of knew what it was is now at a distance from you, isn't it? Maybe a bit like our clients are. So again, you can sort of feel the synergy there. But where does it end? I mean, Adam, technical debt is something that gets thrown up when we talk about product and making sure we're remaining resilient. But it feels like a vicious circle.
I think it is. I mean, I think we all have to deal with technical debt. After day one, you seem to introduce it. So I think it's inevitable, particularly in looking at some of the admin systems that are used in FS. Some of them have been there for, not quite millennia, but certainly decades. I guess you got to live with it to a degree. You mustn't let it restrict your ability to innovate, because if you don't innovate, you go backwards. It's unfortunately a bit of a hygiene factor that there'll be some level of technical debt around, but if it gets too much, then that's very bad news for a company.
Yeah,
I guess some of the overlaying of systems may not address the debt position and may cause further issues down the road, but not everything has to be ripped out to put something new in.
Yeah,
contrary to Simon's point there may be the ability to add something into your estate without having solved the core problem, which may be a quicker and cheaper way to get to innovation, which may give you a short-term gain, but ultimately that non-sexy tech debt is something that you have to face up to at some point.
I mean, Matt, your experience as well. What's how much of the tech? I mean, it seems to have changed the industry a bit, but how much of the tech that's being added into the estates, that layering, how much of that do you think is focused upon sort of driving some positive customer outcomes? On the consumer duty sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I think almost every piece of tech that goes in has been implemented in the name of positive consumer experience. There's a component of customer experience for almost every project that we do. But I think the cost of technical debt has been well highlighted by Simon and Adam. In terms of the operational cost and business agility costs, I don't think that should be overlooked either, because with a complex tech landscape, you're unable to adapt to changes in industry, whether that be regulatory changes or competitive pressures. And that can really hamstring a business from growing. So Simon mentioned that the growth in tech cost, but not growth in revenues. Some of that may be due to not being able to roll out new products or enhance products as quickly as the business would like to. So it's definitely a hot topic, and it's not something that's going to go away. To your point, Paul, as we get more and more complex in our tech ecosystem.
Yeah, and certainly in our discussions, playing to that theme, it would appear that companies are beginning to be much more conscious of their data management. The fact that their asset in their business is their data, but they can only exploit that data if they have the right communications, the right content, the right engagement process with their customers. Are you, I'm bound to be asking the right question. Say, Are you seeing that area grow for Lexis? It does appear to be playing right into your hands there.
Absolutely. So, and just hearing the last 5 minutes of conversation, there's a piece around marginal gains. You can't change all of the technology platforms. That's way too big. So pick on a few smaller elements. So, thinking back to some of the things that we've done recently to prove that external data has a role in some of these challenges is things like mortality screening. So rather than doing it in the old way, which was perhaps doing mortality screening once a year to check that the people you were paying a pension to is still alive, our clients have moved from monthly, and now some are talking about doing that weekly, because there's a direct cost saving that if you stop paying a pension almost the minute you're informed of a consumer dying, and not just relying on the next of kin of the deceased to inform you, there are some direct benefits there. So, and if you can begin that cost saving journey with the minimum of effort from the client side and prove the value of the return, and as was mentioned earlier, it frees up cash to go and look at other elements as well. So for me, it's this piece around marginal gains. And as again was mentioned earlier, if it doesn't work, that's fine too. You can learn as much from your failures of things that you tried, as long as you do it quickly and you find out why it didn't work, rather than just going, oh, it didn't work, let's move on, without the learning experience. And so really what we're saying to our clients is that because we're operating in this digital world now, where you don't have the same control, again, in the old days, pension statementing was you sent out a letter once a year to say this is what's in your pension, but it's now a two-way continuum of something sent out, you can immediately respond. So your data always needs to be as good as it possibly can be. So it's not a one and done, it's an ongoing monitoring to make sure whenever your data is used, either sort of proactively or reactively, you're connecting the right dots together to give the customer the best experience.
Yeah, and I guess that sort of leads us into we're closing in on the time we've set aside for this, but that data and analytics, understanding the data in our businesses and being analysed, the processes is no different from our customers. Understanding our customers, there's a lack of that too, including how we speak to them, how we communicate with them. Harnessing those data insights, that's, I guess, again, where Livingston in that quite raw way, by understanding the estate, that's the perfect articulation of what I guess you're doing on a day-by-day basis, Simon, is it?
Yes, yeah, and as we get to the top of our time together, Paul, all I will say is the opportunity is significant. It is not easy to realise, but the gains are absolutely there. Data is an essential conduit to making an informed decision. Knowing where to get it, knowing what to do with it, and knowing how to weaponize it for your commercial benefit is a specialist task. But it's not something our customers should shy away from. I think the common theme that we're all probably getting with our clients right now is, I'd love to buy your stuff, but I need to make sure I'm going to get the return. The cost pressures are real and the budgetary constraints are real. So there is a significant opportunity, not necessarily of getting it perfectly right, but just getting it a bit right is actually going to generate a significant gain. And I think sometimes people are overwhelmed by the task and therefore intimidated by even getting started. But you kind of have to start somewhere to kind of drive those efficiencies. And you won't get everything. Some of these things will be too complex to realise.
Yeah. I guess closing comments, I've got one last question from Chloe's side, which I think she's best qualified to talk about from a customer perspective. But just finishing off on that cost focus and consultancy, again, is that where you're finding a lot of your time is spent, or Alpha's time is spent the businesses trying to understand their own data, so they can actually look to make change? I mean, are they willing? I still wonder sometimes whether they are as willing as they should be.
There's definitely a lot of appetite for change. I think the two biggest sort of restrictors are, one, the data quality and the sort of capability that people have to deliver what they want to deliver, and whether or not they're willing to do all the groundwork before you can realize the value. A bit like Simon was saying, you've got to do a lot up front to get to the point where you can deliver something really good. But I think and other people have talked about this, there's a first step, and that will still be worth doing. And then the other thing is the level of sort of risk aversion that we see in the industry. And actually, a lot of our clients we have conversations with about, yes, there's a risk at one end at kind of going a bit too close to guidance, kind of pushing that guidance advice boundary. But there's also a huge risk at the other side, which is that if your customers don't know what you need from them, don't understand the product that you've sold them, aren't aware of the options that they have, then that's also a massive risk. So there's both a sort of efficiency saving over the long term to move to more digital personalized solutions, but actually also a massive win from that sort of regulation, which I think is only going to keep pushing to be able to evidence the fact that your consumers actually know what they've got and understand what options they have.
And then probably finally, a general comment really, Matt and Chloe and Alan on this one probably. Any crystal ball gazing about what your customers are seeing as just over the horizon for, enhancing their customer-centric consumer duty focus, all that stuff? Any words of wisdom or ideas about what's coming around the corner?
Yeah, look, I'd echo a little bit what Simon said. I am incredibly optimistic about the future. I think there are some tremendous tools out there, some tremendous technology to implement, make an impact on customer experience, and it's not necessarily about doing everything perfectly. To Simon's point, you can pick a few things and have a pretty large impact on both costs and customer experience. So I think there's tremendous opportunity out there. It's just a matter of executing. I say that's the tough part. But with a
little help, from some experts, hopefully.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and perhaps building on that, it's I'll use a Formula One analogy, but the driver and the car are two of the components. The car is built by a whole team of experts, and it's that collaborative piece with all working together with that common goal is where the best results come from. So it needs to be collaboration with an outcome that you're trying to change and demonstrate that you've changed from a positive outcome, and then work out which tools you need to use, when you need to use them, how often you need to use them. And so is it boring? It's not the new sizzly sausage, all the exciting bits. It's fundamentally getting more of the basics right more of the time, and that's where perhaps the first wins are. And then you've got a solid foundation, and you can build for the future from there. But don't build the future on a sort of bed of sand. Basically, is I guess what I'm saying.
There's a couple of sayings in that space, wasn't there, about that as well, which is be willing to, I think Jeff Bezos said, be willing to be misunderstood if you're going to innovate. And there was another one that says be willing to fail and then reiterate and, fail fast, etc. So hopefully people will look in on this set of skills and think, right, well, at least we know where to ask the questions. I think we're sort of pretty well out of time. So if I can just say many thanks to you guys for putting the time aside to participate today. I know we're pulling together a full write-up of the topics we've covered today, including more detailed contributions from each of the speakers. But with that, we'll close out and say thank you very much for participating, guys.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Paul. Thanks, everyone.